Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I don't want to delay our start here because we have an excellent program today. So I want to welcome you to our Community College STEM Network webinar. My name is Michelle Van Oy, and I'm Director of the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers and PI of the CCSN, the Community College STEM Network. Our network is a group of researchers and practitioners working to generate and share research on community college STEM pathways. We have this ongoing webinar series, as well as other research projects and partnerships that are focused on understanding how low-income academically talented students navigate pathways in STEM fields at community colleges. So there's a lot more to learn, and I'm really excited that you're joining us today. We have a webinar that will be led by Elizabeth Meza from our team at the CCSN. She's co-PI on this project and has been leading some really exciting research and working with a great group of practitioners around this work. So I'll let her introduce all the other speakers. I just want to note before we get started that we are recording the webinar and it will be shared with everyone so you can watch later or share with others who might be interested in watching. Listening. And we also ask that you keep your cameras off for the duration of the webinar, but we encourage you to ask any questions or provide comments throughout the webinar in the chat, and then we'll answer them throughout the presentation and later as Elizabeth and others would like to address them. So I'm going to at this point hand things over to Elizabeth to get us started here and go forward with our interesting discussion today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Meza at the University of Washington. But before I was at the University of Washington for many years, I was a community college faculty member and administrator in Washington State. And my first NSF grant was an STEM grant back in the early 2000s. So I'm a longtime supporter of STEM and interested in STEM programming, and I hope to share with you some interesting work today. So today Michelle already talked a little bit about the CCSN, so I'll give you a bit of a review. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some work that we've been doing, basically trying to get a sense of STEM grants in community colleges. So I did a landscape or a content analysis of what the interventions are that are present in STEM awards at community colleges. I'm going to share that work with you today. And then we'll discuss kind of what our next steps in this research are, as well as a survey, and I'll introduce some of my colleagues in the CCSN there. And then we're really excited today to have two panelists with us, Dr. Gabriel Mast from Skagit Valley College and Christine Washburn from Everett Community College. And they're really enthusiastic and wonderful community college educators and STEM enthusiasts, and they're going to share some of their perspectives with you too. But we're really interested in hearing from all of you on the webinar as well. So at any point, please put your own questions or comments into chat, and we'll open it up for discussion at the end. So Michelle already kind of went over this, but I did want to share that this work is part of the Community College STEM Network. It's housed at Rutgers University. I'm a part of that network along with some of the colleagues you'll hear about today. And our mission is to connect and support researchers and practitioners in conducting and translating research on how students navigate STEM pathways into evidence-based practices, programs, and policies. So we're really trying to create that nexus between research and practice. So I'll just jump right in to the analysis. So kind of to get a sense of STEM awards in community colleges, we looked at what is the population that we're trying to identify here. So we looked at the STEM awards that were awarded to community colleges between 2015 and 2023. And 68 of those awards went to community colleges, like a single community college where the college was the lead institution, and it went for their programming right there at the college. And then there was an additional 36 that were collaborative awards. So more than one institution collaborating together, but the community college was the lead institution. And it could have been a community college collaboration with like a lot of community colleges, or just a one-on-one, two colleges, but the community college was the lead. And then there were an additional 66 where there was a four-year college that was the lead institution, and the community college was a collaborator. We didn't look at the institutions where community college received a subaward, which used to be more popular, but has kind of been discouraged by NSF recently, because when you're a subawardee, you maybe don't get quite as much kind of say in the award as when you're actually a collaborator. So that's a total of 171. And just to give you a little bit of context, there's currently about 651 active awards. So this slide is actually from the 2022 NSF business meeting, and I have to thank my colleague Dave Brown for providing this slide for us. So this slide shows that about 15% of the awards from 2006 to 2022 went to associate's degree granting institutions. So that is a bit of an underrepresentation of community colleges in the STEM award fields, because we know that about 40% of undergraduates in the US attend community colleges. And this likely represents quite a much smaller amount of money as well, because we know that associate's degree granting institutions, community colleges, are often not the winners of the Track 3 awards, which are the really big multi-million-dollar awards. So while this is 15% of the grants being made, it's not 15% of the money. So in doing this research, we wanted to look at, well, what are the interventions? So let me just say, first of all, our collaborative is very much interested in helping community colleges to win more of those awards. And my colleagues, Dr. Brown and John Kropczak, run a series of webinars and training kind of institutes that help community colleges to become more competitive with STEM awards. So if you're a community college and you're thinking, oh, I would like to try to help and solve this problem, please look at our website and reach out to them around getting involved in their workshops. But part of this research is looking at, okay, so what is actually in the awards that go to community colleges? So what are the most common interventions or activities that community college STEM programs describe in their grant abstracts? And then what do those interventions or activities tell us about the theories of change that community college practitioners think make a difference for STEM scholars? So I pulled all of the abstracts for active awards that went to community colleges as of March of 2023. And I looked at the abstracts of 81 different awards. And that is a slight undercount for reasons that are in the weeds, which I can get into later, but I won't right now. But I did a content analysis of what was in those abstracts to find out what are the interventions that are most popular in community college STEM grants. So again, there were 81 that I looked at. And so the most popular interventions were found in between 30 plus, somewhere between 30 and 40. So that tells us right off the bat that there were no interventions that were mentioned in more than half of the award abstracts. But 30 plus were mentioned faculty mentoring, which is not surprising. Faculty mentoring is really a pillar of the STEM program and should probably be embedded in each one of the STEM grants. So it's not surprising that we would see faculty mentoring appear in an abstract. But the most popular interventions outside of faculty mentoring were some kind of original research opportunity. So either occurring on campus or off campus, but giving students the opportunity to perform research. And then the other thing that was very popular was some sort of cohort or community building activity, like a STEM club or social gatherings that would take place that would endeavor to create a sense of community among STEM scholars. Okay. So then the next most popular, so found in between 20 and 30 abstracts, were internship opportunities. So either providing or trying to develop internship opportunities and provide them to STEM students. Some of them were a little bit less detailed in terms of like just announcing internship opportunities to STEM scholars, that sort of thing. And then we had peer mentoring or tutoring appear in a number of abstracts. So more than just the tutoring that would be available to, through a tutoring center, but some sort of more dedicated tutoring. And then maybe some kind of peer mentoring among, so like a first year students and
Apparently did a meta-analysis of all the community college.
so sorry. So some sort of peer mentoring that would be like maybe the second year students in an STEM program would be mentoring the first year students. That was popular. And then we heard about transfer support, some kind of intrusive or enhanced advising. So perhaps, requiring students to meet with a dedicated STEM advisor, something like that, not the faculty mentoring, but a different kind of intrusive or enhanced advising. And then also popular were formal community college and university STEM collaboration. So maybe the development of a class together or sharing of curriculum between the two groups, or, taking the STEM scholars at community colleges to the university for a day, something like that. Some sort of a development of more of a collaboration between those two groups. Okay, and then there were a number more, 31, in fact, more interventions that were described in somewhere between 1 and 11. I shouldn't say proposals, I should say abstracts there in the title. That first group is really dedicated towards kind of career building. So, for example, job shadowing, networking opportunities and events, career counseling, that sort of thing. And then the second group that you see there on that slide are just a smorgasbord of other things that were really dedicated, location specific things that the faculty in that specific STEM program had felt were important for their population of students. So, for example, summer bridge programs, boot camp, also known as boot camps or workshops. There were a couple different names for that kind of thing. Maybe faculty mentor training focused on equity. Perhaps the redesign of STEM courses. So a number of things that would support campus initiatives. So what does all this tell us? Well, there are a lot of ideas out there, as I think one takeaway. No one theory or set of interventions was clear in terms of being really present in many of the abstracts. However, there are a few that were definitely more popular. And so I think the focus on research opportunities and internships that we saw seems to suggest that faculty feel it's important that students have the opportunity to see themselves as scientists. So in the literature, there's a lot of research on developing a STEM identity. And we seem to see that reflected in some of these grants. The cohort and community building, I think that's reflective of what is known in the literature as a sense of belonging. And that became pretty apparent to me. I've actually just this week been doing some interviews with students up at Everett Community College in their STEM program, and they really talk about the sense of community that they feel in that program and how important it is to them. Third, the focus on faculty mentoring and advising. It really does suggest that STEM pathways are still pretty complicated, and that transfer in particular is, and what institution you might want to transfer to and what their requirements are for particular majors is pretty complicated for students. And that a faculty mentor can really be valuable in helping them navigate that transition. And then finally, I think, this tells us that we need to know a lot more. And we're eager to hear your thoughts in the discussion and talk more about STEM programming at community colleges. So the next steps in terms of ourselves, I'm working with my colleague, Dr. Maria Espino. And Dr. Espino and I are doing a systematic literature review. So we're looking at everything that's been published about STEM grants in community colleges. And Dr. Espino actually already shared some of our results at the Council for the Study of Community Colleges a few weeks ago. And we're also going to be presenting that work at the ASEE conference in June in Portland. So if you're there, please come hear us talk about our systematic literature review if you're interested. And we'll be doing an upcoming webinar through this channel on that systematic literature review. And then my colleague, Dr. Will Tyson, is going to be doing a college survey where he'll be reaching out to community colleges who have STEM grants to learn more about their particular grant. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tyson just to say a few words about that survey, and then we'll get to our discussants.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So like you said, I'm leading our community college grantee survey. The participants in that survey will be the principal investigators and co-principal investigators from the STEM projects that are led by the community colleges, the principal investigators and co-PIs from the collaborative awards, and the co-PIs from the awards that were led by a 4-year with a community college collaborator. So our goal is to get the community college leaders from each of these recent STEM grants. Some of the key things that we're looking at here is, and you can go advance 2 slides. There's no point in handing it over to me.
Sorry, Will, I'm having trouble all of a sudden advancing. There we go.
And then the
Okay,
next
we did
slide.
that one. And the next one. There we go.
Yeah, so we're in the process of working on the survey in collaboration with a survey center at Rutgers. So we're looking at a few basic things, basically to see how the abstracts from the landscape study ended up in practice. So what's the overall kind of impact of the strategies that these programs used? So what components did the project use? How effective were those strategies? So I'm basically going through a current draft of the survey right now, but basically we're going to be looking at asking them to confirm elements of the grant. How has the grant changed, compared to what you proposed? As we all know, sometimes what you plan to do isn't exactly what you do. I'll ask the grantees about the STEM areas of focus in the grant, how many STEM scholars were funded through the program. We're going to ask them to tell us the extent to which they were able to achieve kind of key goals of the STEM program, such as increasing STEM enrollment, supporting students with demonstrated financial need, fostering diversity and inclusion. We're going to ask them kind of which ones they were able to reach, which ones were most difficult for them to reach, which strategies they were able to achieve, and then listing the core program elements that they were able to reach in the areas that Elizabeth described: advising, career preparation, and STEM identity development, social support and outreach, academic support, transfer support, and faculty professional development and institutional reforms. Within these core program elements, we're asking them to describe the effectiveness of the program and the level of student involvement that they had in these programs. This will allow us to get a better sense of the context of the work that they were able to do, and hopefully figure out which of these core program elements were most impactful, most effective across the STEM program. Then we'll ask them some questions about any social research and evaluation efforts that they've done within their projects, and ask them if they what research would they like from us, because our next step after this grantee survey is a student survey, and so we want input from the grantees about what they want to know more about their students and their decision-making processes. So that's it for me, and I look forward to the discussants and any questions you all have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Will. I think we're going to introduce our discussants now. So Gabriel Mast and Christine Washburn. And Gabriel is an STEM co-PI at in Skagit Valley College in Washington. He has a program called Cardinal Scholars. And Christine is up at Everett Community College, also in Washington. And they have a program called eSTEM. Christine's is a Track 2 program, so they've had a couple of, oh, I'm sorry, am I still screen sharing? Let me get to the right spot here, you guys. Can you see their names now? Okay, let me get to the real slideshow. There we go. Does that look better? Okay. So Christine and Gabriel, and I just like to start out by asking you, both of you, to kind of share your reactions to the research and how you think that fits into your own programs. What are the elements that you're seeing pop up? So should I call on Gabriel first?
Oh, I was hoping you'd call on Christine first. Okay, that's great. I'll start. So hi everyone, I'm Gabriel Mast. I'll just give you a super quick background because my title doesn't look super relevant right now. So I trained as a behavior endocrinologist, a social neuroscientist, and I taught as faculty for many years. And then I moved to become the Dean of Instruction. And so for most of this time period, I was the Dean over this area. And I work really closely with the STEM faculty, having been one. And I just most recently moved on to the position I have now. So that's my background. And when I looked through this research, our PI and I had a great conversation this morning, just it's her day off. So just talking through, it really resonates with us. We kind of fit into the schools. We had a lot of the main interventions, so faculty mentoring, cohort building. We got our grant right before COVID. It was our first STEM program, so we got it kind of off the ground, and then COVID hit, so that was a whole other interesting issue to address. And I think to start out with, I'll just say the two things that we've seen overall are, one, that faculty mentor and that faculty relationship has been the key intervention in our grant. So the students' relationships with faculty has just really been incredible. You can see it in our annual reviews for our evaluation, what the students say. And also the faculty have really it's been really interesting. The faculty have really used their relationships with their mentees to change their teaching and instruction and their approach. So we had inclusive pedagogy as part of our intervention, but really the relationships that our faculty have had with their mentees has really actually had this really nice circular approach as well. So I'll say that. And then the last thing I'll say that we can talk about is that STEM grants are very unique for NSF grants. So they're very administrative heavy. So you normally have a PI that's a faculty member, and that STEM faculty member may not have a ton of experience working with financial aid, working with marketing, figuring out how to administer these scholarships. So it's a really big lift the first time around. So we're about to go for our second round, but I think I think personally it's a unique grant, in that it's different than most other NSF grants. And so I think that's something to really take into account when you build and launch a grant like this, that it's quite administrative heavy, and that can pose a lot of challenges. Anyway, I have other thoughts about that as well, but I'll let Christine talk.
Hey, so I'm Christine Washburn at Everett Community College. I teach physics, and this is my 19th year here. I was the PI for an STEM track 1, and then now I'm co-PI on an STEM track 2. Our current STEM is the Equity in STEM program. We're intentional about recruiting diverse students and offering support. Let's see, some of the things that ring true. It was interesting to hear the interventions and like pick out which ones are us, right? Because it was interesting that in 81 of them there was so little overlap. Actually, you'd think it was more overlap, but a lot of these, but admittedly a lot of these for me coded as a similar thing. There was a lot of like faculty mentoring, advising, intrusive advising, transfer support. A lot of those for me are synonyms at my institution. So it was interesting to see them popping up everywhere. I wonder if that's maybe the more unifying thing between all of them, is if you lump all those together. Yeah. So, and that to me rings true as it's hard to help students navigate because they're all starting in different places, and it's hard to get them to their desired transfer destination because there's so much variation in where you could go and what those different places require. When I was at a university, you know, someone just handed me a piece of paper and was like, take these courses during these semesters and you're good to go. Like come back if you have questions. But here I see my students every quarter because it's a lot of refinement, and to have a main plan and a backup plan is very cumbersome for community college students sometimes. When you were showing the statistics about community colleges not applying as often, like proportional to our representation in academia, I wasn't too surprised because my own grants office is very underfunded and understaffed. So we're very under-resourced in terms of grant support. It's just not our main objective here, and the college hasn't embraced that that's a good resource to invest in. And so people at my college struggle to apply for grants presently because of that. And I wonder if that was reflected in that larger data. That's all I'll say for right now.
I'll just jump in and agree with what Christine said about the overlap. I had the same reaction. So when I saw intrusive advising and faculty mentoring and transfer advising, I thought we had the same thing where it's very overlapped. So it's probably slightly how people call those out versus exactly what's happening. And then I think the same thing is true for the grant capacity. So I think you really see that across. I know NSF is really trying to tackle that, but community colleges just are behind our four-year sibling institutions on just, you know, including grants in how the institutions run. There's not a lot of support for it. So you tend to see, like in our institution, I had actually done a lot of grant work myself in previous positions. And so that helped kind of launch the grants that we were doing. But it's not very systemic. So I'll just add one other thing, and then Elizabeth, you can jump in. We really found for STEM that we had a lot of, you know, you're talking a lot about the interventions because, you know, like, what is it, like 60% of the program is for direct scholarship. So, but you really focus a lot on the kind of the interventions and the support, but there isn't really a lot of funding for that in the STEM grant. So we kind of immediately applied for an IUS grant and got it that kind of like complement what we were doing. And we were successful in that, and it's great, but we kind of realized really fast that in order to provide the kind of support structures that we wanted, we needed to get another kind of another grant that helped to like support what we were doing in this project. So I think that's something I've heard a lot in the feedback as well, is that there's a lot to do in this grant, and there isn't always a lot of funding to go along with it. So,
yeah, I mean, we should say that the primary, you know, the primary intervention is really the scholarship, right? Yes. That is and then all these other things are kind of things that faculty members really want to do, that they feel like students really need, and that they're trying to do with limited resources, as you've said. So I think, you know, supplementing an STEM with an IUS is really a great idea. when you can do it and pull it off with the limited resources of the community college grant writing operation. Having just spoken with a bunch of students up at Everett, the two things that really stood out were the financial support and the community building that came with the grants. So those are the things that they were really most thankful for, and really thought had most helped them to stay in school. Please go ahead. Anybody else with questions for our discussants or for me? Go ahead. I see there's one question in the chat. So I'm going to hesitate to call this a meta-analysis because admittedly, this was a very simple landscape analysis, and we are doing a more thorough systematic review of the published reports and articles, but this was just meant to get a sense of what's happening out there. So no, we did not look at how grants had changed as NSF updates the program, but I know that and there's probably someone on this webinar who can talk more about the changes that NSF has made and what the intention was with making those changes. And please feel free to jump in if that's you. And then that second question, did you quantify the number of submissions? No, I don't have access to submissions versus awards. So I am unable to share those statistics.
In the chat, Deborah asked for me to talk more about the equity part of the Everett eSTEM program. So I think first and foremost, we're trying to recruit diverse students. I haven't heard people talk a lot in STEM about recruitment, and it's really challenging at community colleges because you're supposed to recruit academically talented students, but community college, they're only here for 2 years. At one of the STEM PI conferences, I walked around and looked at all the posters and I was like, how are people recruiting? And it's a really difficult problem. A lot of folks are like, well, we just wait till they're done with a year of college and then we fund them for the second year. And it was tragic to me because so many talented people have been weeded out by things that had nothing to do with talent in that first year. But in a lot of the 4 years, like they have a little more of this luxury if they're here for 4 years, so we could take the first or second semester grades and do that. So we've been working hard on recruitment that starts very early because like the diversity of our population sadly tanks the longer they're at the college. So we wanted the interventions to be early so that we could get a more diverse group of students through. So we have our recruitment like shortly after fall quarter starts because the high school grades are a bit unreliable, and we have a lot of students who are homeschooled or they went to an alternative high school that didn't do grades. So it's tricky to do academically talented recruitment at the beginning, but a few weeks in, we're having instructors like individually tap students and say, you should really apply for this. And that helps too, because when we put out a general call for, hey, apply for the scholarship, sadly, a lot of our students will weed themselves out. So it's nice to have the faculty and the advisors like pushing a diverse group of students to apply to just increase the diversity of the pool. In addition to that, we actually have a professional development component to our work where we have a STEM faculty from each department: biology, chemistry, engineering, computer science, math, physics. Every year, like every department sends a tribute who does professional development for the year on incorporating equity in their curriculum. Yeah, so those are our main equity components.
I'm just going to echo that, even though Deb didn't ask me, because we also have a really strong equity focus. A lot of the same issues. We ended up lowering our math requirement because we initially saw that right away that was a real barrier. So we reached out to students. I can't remember what our initial math requirement was, but we reached out and lowered that and we have an accelerated pre-college math program. So we allowed students to do that and then join the program once they'd been through that. That really helped with our recruiting. We have a community of practice. It actually is all the faculty from all the areas do once a year, and that community of practice is really focused on inclusive pedagogy and having equitable outcomes in your science classrooms, and kind of establishing sense of belonging among students who may not feel that way. And then interestingly for us, we realized really fast that we have a strong undergraduate research component. And we decided pretty soon that because we have first and second year students and not major students, we really embedded that into our courses. So we really don't do a lot of individualized undergraduate research. We really do course-based undergraduate research. And we saw that actually as a real equity lever as well, as a way of reaching those students. And then again, those faculty are tapping those students and having them come on. A lot of our students have gone to DC to do presentations at the STEM Student Scholars, which has been great. So I think that's been really helpful as well. And there was one other thing I was going to mention. Now I can't remember, so I'll see if there are other questions.
Wanted to chime in a little. This is Will. I wanted to chime in a little bit to the question about recruiting. I'm also a co-PI on a STEM grant that's a collaborative effort between USF. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm a sociology professor at University of South Florida, and in Polk State College, local community college. And part of the recruiting challenge, I think there's an assumption within the STEM program that the money recruits itself, but there's not quite an understanding more broadly that these students have other ways they can make money. And that's the competition. They're competing against jobs. They're, and STEM programs often come with requirements. And so students have to weigh against the traditional way that they're used to making money and that everyone else expects them to make money. And that, of course, at a lot of particularly public universities, most students are working off campus anyway. So that's just the norm, as opposed to a scholarship that will require kind of more intensive time within the program and maybe a change to the way that they're used to being a student. And so that's something that I think really needs to be emphasized within the STEM program more broadly, that we're really leaving out a lot of students who may not necessarily meet the tag of academically talented because they're not getting access to these resources. And they also may not necessarily meet the standard of low income because they are working full time. And so how do we rectify that in terms of recruiting is really a big challenge for the whole program, but definitely for community colleges in particular.
I just want to say yes to all of that. That's 100% true. We created a program. We thought about kind of graduate NSF fellowships. We had that in mind when we created this. So we really wanted to create a fellowship program. And it was a real challenge to get students to not see it just as another scholarship. It was also a real challenge to get our financial aid office to let us use the money in ways that Dr. Tyson was just talking about. So you have more flexibility with this funding, but our financial aid office was really reticent to not, weren't really ready for us to do that. So we worked really hard to address some of those issues, because you can use this money to help supplement stuff that traditional financial aid doesn't address, to help those students who would normally be working to be more in a fellowship. So again, I think there's a lot to learn there. But that was another thing we saw a lot, especially with the diversity of our applicants.
One of the key things that that we found in our research, interviewing students who were community college transfers into USF engineering, is that the STEM scholarships gave them the kind of real opportunity to treat their education as a job, which is something that some of my older research found that faculty and staff want the students to do. But it's hard to ask students to treat their education as a job if they're not getting paid as if it were a job. And so part of the framing of STEM as a scholarship, I wouldn't say it's problematic, but it may not necessarily be accurate with respect to the student's needs, because treating it as being paid for participating in these programs, these types of professionalization seminars, these types of community building things, and treating it more as a job and getting them to think in terms of, okay, participating in study groups is part of my job, my obligation as a STEM scholar. Those sort of practices that we may take for granted that good students do, if they're able to actually feel like they're getting paid to do that, then that may be a more impactful and that may be a more effective way of getting students into the program and staying in the program. If I have to, from some research I did years ago, one story that'll always stick with me is a staff member talking about the time that she ran into a student who had I wouldn't say dropped out of the program, but hadn't enrolled that semester. The student had one semester left before getting their bachelor's at a university, and she ran into him at Foot Locker, where he was working full time, and she was trying to convince him to come back into the program. And he said, well, I just got promoted to manager. I'm making this much an hour. And if I go back, then I'll have to give that up. And I don't think we quite understand all the pushes and pulls that students deal with. We think of their education as kind of linear pathway to a associate's degree and a bachelor's degree. But there's really a lot of push and pull factors that may discourage students from pursuing their education, not because they're not academically talented, but because they're people who have a lot going on. And that's something that we need to account for at all levels of the STEM program.
Well, I think you've made some really great points, which we're all like nodding our heads and agreeing with. So thank you very much for that. There's also some really interesting and insightful questions in the chat that I want to get to. So Catherine is saying, what can faculty do to build institutional support? I don't know if Gabe, you want to address that one? Thank you for your question, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm assuming you mean institutional support for the grant work here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think NSF is offering some pretty good seminars right now about how to go about getting these grants. I mean, we're not supposed to say, hey, which one, but I have participated in reviewing applications. So I think that's been a strong feedback every time I participate in that. And then I think just getting started is really, I mean, you just get started. Once you get one and you get going, you start to see right away like how to build that culture, but it really is just a matter of just starting and going. I think the only other thing I'd say is, for faculty who want to do that, you have to make connections across the college. So you got to reach out and make connections with financial aid and student services. And some faculty are used to doing that and some faculty are not. So that would be my advice. I'd be interested to see what Christine said.
Yeah, I agree. Like all the STEM faculty at my institution, I mean, we voluntarily chose to be here instead of industry because we're passionate about helping students. So the passion is there, and especially like with time, people start seeing the problems with the system, and we want to do something to make it better. So that's often where a lot of our ideas come for grants. But there's also the matter of alignment. Like, is this thing I want to do align with what the STEM solicitation is asking, or what this grant is asking? So that was a new skill set for a lot of us too. But yeah, and we've had to make friends with like lots of staff across the college, which we weren't accustomed to. We have weird cultural silos that have kept us from doing a good job of that in the past.
And then the last thing I'd say is writing grants. I'm sure a lot of you have done it. It's an art. So I think the first time I kind of mentored some of the faculty through, they were like, well, this might actually happen like this. And I was like, you got to write the grant and then we're going to see how it goes. And you can tweak it as you go. So I think that's a learning curve as well, especially for STEM faculty. They want to be like, we said this and we're doing exactly this and we're not going to vary it. That's not how grants often work. You got to have that flexibility. So I think just getting that cultural knowledge built up, I think makes people more comfortable participating.
And then Catherine also asked about sustainability after the grant ends. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'll start and then I'll see what everyone else says. We have continued to apply for other sources of funding. So as I said, we got an IUS grant. We also tried really hard to align our interventions with the direction of our institution. So we have we're a college that's doing pathways, and we're a college that's really embraced equity and kind of an inclusive pedagogy culture. So we've tried to overlap those. We've also managed to keep our dean level and vice president level administrators involved, and that's actually really helped as well. So when it comes to operational planning, those efforts often do get sustained. So it's kind of like a three-way mix of that. That's my answer.
Some of this, my college, I feel like we've actually done an above average job of institutionalizing ideas for change. And I say that with a weird face because I'm not accustomed to like bragging about how awesome my administration is at my college and our institutional policies. But like slowly through our guided pathways process, we have actually institutionalized a pretty good advising system that helps people like not fall through the cracks when they start and get connected with a actual person who touches base like every quarter or two and asks like, do you have any questions about what classes to take? How are your classes going? And sort of we have a an early warning system in place for if students are doing bad. We've also been trying to make some of these practices more widespread. So we take the scholars on field trips. Every quarter we offer a field trip to a transfer institution, a field trip to an industry partner, and some kind of cohort building activity. And we partnered with our Trio and Mesa programs to offer those so that we're not offering 3 field trips. Like we offer 3 field trips a quarter to the students, but we run one of them. We run and pay for one of them. So that definitely helps. Like if we're getting students connected to Trio and Mesa, then more of these opportunities are available. The STEM Club has also been like seeing, oh, it's really good to do field trips. We should offer some field trips too. So these types of resources are becoming a little more widespread available. Yeah, so some of these things are starting to get institutionalized. We have some cohort building activities within our division. They're not quite as strong as what our eSTEM program offers presently, but we're trying to build that up too, like including, you know, internship workshops and end of quarter pizza parties for all the STEM majors.
There's a question from Eugene about the types of research questions and theoretical considerations included in proposals led by community college practitioners. I'm sure there's other people on this call. I'm thinking of Dave in particular, who might be good to jump in on this question. But in the systematic literature review work, we're not seeing as many research questions or theory being embedded in, like explicitly embedded into the grant work as maybe would be beneficial. So there is this implicit sense, right? So we're going to do cohorting and community building, and then that will implicitly increase a student's sense of belonging, but it's not necessarily explicitly called out. But I think that is something that in the stronger proposals or stronger and those that are sustainable, there is an underlying theory there that helps to both guide the program and then also you know, sustain it after it's gone. So I definitely would encourage you know, a theoretical grounding of the work. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to jump in, but I'd invite other comments on that one, or from our panelists as well.
Admittedly, I think a lot of our ideas for these types of intervention grants come more from our experience. The compounding factors of we don't have a lot of time dedicated to research that's compensated, so we're not necessarily doing lit reviews very often, and also there's paywalls for most journals that our college doesn't necessarily give us access through, so it makes it hard. I will say, like, if you're looking for an idea, I was kind of stunned that there aren't more STEMs that provide wraparound services. Because if your goal is to help low-income students, certainly giving them money is the first barrier to remove. But the next, like, what is keeping low-income students from succeeding is such a massive pool of reasons that it seems like wraparound services is the thing to try. And I'm kind of surprised there's not more of that.
Yeah, STEM's a little bit of an interesting, I think I was just thinking about our IUS application, which is there was much more of a focus on your theoretical grounding and how you were basing your interventions in the research. I would agree. I think a lot of practical applications would be great. I'm always surprised that when you do your application, folks are always, you have to list how long you'll give a scholarship, and community college students are, about 50% part-time on average, depending on the college and the year. And so, we give twice as long for part-time students as we do for full-time students, and that I think isn't really common. So I think, having those kind of interventions is also really practical.
Great. And then there's also a question from Eugene about how to talk about kind of GPA first year versus second year students, all that kind of thing in the context of community colleges. And maybe I think the two of you would be great to address that.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's flexibility about how these things are presented. Academically talented can be a GPA cutoff, but there's other things you can use also. So we've been using a combination of like, well, here's a GPA threshold, but if you're not at that threshold, we'd love to hear from one of your faculty members about why they think you have academic promise, even though it's not represented in your GPA. And that was fine with the NSF. So there are alternative things you can use for academic eligibility instead of just GPA. And financial eligibility, there is a bit of flexibility. Like we said, we would use unmet need based on our college's definition of financial eligibility. Your college might require that students be Pell eligible, but if unmet need is enough, then there's a lot of your students who are going to qualify financially.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I mentioned earlier about our math requirements and the grade requirements for incoming high school students. We flex right away that, it is both of those are flexible in the application. So it's really about how you set your standards and how you kind of equitably apply those. And I think the nice thing about NSF is we were able to kind of change our approach as we went along when we saw where we ran into barriers, and we saw where some of our issues had some inequitable outcomes. So we could change that. And I thought that was really nice. So I think for us, the only other thing is we think about the student's success transferring on. And so we use those as interventions to try to help students to stay at a certain GPA just for their transfer success. But we have had students leave the program because they weren't doing as well as they could have been, but it was like several interventions in, and there were often other things going on as well. So.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I guess I'd like to ask you about what are the biggest challenges you faced since receiving your STEM grant. You touched on recruiting, Christine. What else would you say?
I will add that there's this tension between STEM saying you can't force students to do things, but also we really need to get the students to do things. That's been kind of weird because I believe that the grant language says like we can't force students. We can't say your money is contingent upon you attending these things or doing these things. But those things are important. So it is a little difficult to get students to do something that is technically optional, including cohort building. Like ever since COVID, especially, students resist meeting new people and making friends, even though they know it's good for them and they kind of want that, they still resist it. So there's like some psychology to get them to do the things that they actually know are good for them, but they keep resisting.
Wow, it's like we are administering the same grants. I would have exactly the same. I mean, obviously, I talked about recruiting. It continues to be a challenge, and doing it at the right time and getting the right populations. I've already talked about the kind of building up, the scaffolding up of awarding your finances, getting it all in place. I mean, it's a really big launch. And then I would say if I could change one thing about this, it would be this, I mean, most of the research and literature now around community college success, we talk about, not doing optional. Students don't do optional. And lowering the amount of choices that students have and really helping to, walk their path out for them. And it is very difficult. I mean, I think most colleges kind of get around that by, with the way we word things, it's almost like a lawyer game. Like, see, it's not required, but it's expected, which kind of looks, so it's really, I agree. It's a really, really sticky point about this. And when you do review, I've seen proposals get dinged because they're like, they want to make it required, which is really common practice, I think, in successful community colleges right now. And so I feel like this grant's a little behind the time on that. So I would agree with that as well. I really think, again, it's mostly though, Elizabeth, it's just I think I would say if you're going to get a grant like this, think about some accompanying sources of either get an accompanying grant or have some other, your institution is launching certain initiatives that are along these lines, because it is really an interesting grant where it's a scholarship grant, but it also has interventions, and you can make it the best ones really are combined with other sources of funding and intervention to make it successful. But our students say when they get interviewed, they all say this is way more than a scholarship, and that's the part they love about it, right? Student after student after student says, I thought I was just getting a scholarship, but actually I got, right, what we would call a fellowship experience. And so I think that is one of the biggest strengths of this grant as well, is that it's not just a scholarship.
Okay, and then finally, Andrew's been asking some questions, some follow-ups kind of around social science research. And I would say that yes, and Dave responded around, well, there's not the explicit requirements anymore. There's still this expectation of generation of new knowledge. And I would say that having some kind of a theoretical basis is a good practice. So I wanted to ask the two of you, when you're kind of looking, and maybe Gabriel, especially Christine, you kind of already addressed this. When you're developing or implementing STEM programming, are there particular resources that you turn to, a particular theory that you found really resonates with your students or researcher, a community of scholars, a particular conference? What are some good resources for people?
So I talked to our PI, and she talked about the kind of conferences that NSF puts on as being really valuable. Reaching out to other PI and co-PIs that are in community colleges is a really great resource. I think I was just laughing because I think our award was like at the height of that you need to also generate original research, and there was apparently we were not alone in a vociferous feedback of like, there's no way that we have enough, in order to get the grant, we wrote all this stuff out, and then we were like, there's no way that we're going to get funded to do all this. So I think NSF has kind of backed off that because they realize how impractical that is. So we did have, we have a strong equity focus at our institution. As I said before, we've done a lot of inclusive pedagogy. We've done a lot of communities of practice. We really focus on our STEM faculty. They were kind of slower to adopt that than other parts of the college. Often because I think STEM faculty aren't as exposed to the same kind of research that maybe social science faculty are or humanities faculty are in their training. So we've really customized that. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think I was really excited about the research, and then when we got done, I was like, yeah, this is there's no way we're going to be able to do this based on what we were funded. So
yeah, I was really intimidated by the generation of new knowledge thing. And when I went to the PI's conference after we'd gotten an STEM grant, I was like looking at everybody's program, and I'm like, we're all doing kind of the same things. Are we generating new knowledge if we're all doing kind of the same things? We really should just get together and make one big paper. And also, like, when you read the solicitation, NSF has certain things that they want STEM programs to incorporate. So we are all going to end up doing very similar programs. Clearly, there's like a potpourri of like who is doing what and what they've called it, but we're all going to do similar programs. So it's nice that you don't necessarily have to generate new knowledge. You can just do a good job helping students be successful.
Yeah. I think part of these the new REC awards and the new Hub awards are to kind of bring together some of the information that's out there and try and disseminate that and make that the focus of generating new knowledge rather than having a bunch of individual research projects going on at the community colleges. So I really want to applaud NSF for recognizing that. I think we're at time. I'll turn it back over to Michelle to wrap us up, but I want to just thank you both so much for coming. This has been a great discussion. Everyone who's been here, Love the questions in the chat, and I hope we can continue this and see more of you in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you everybody else for joining this conversation. This was fantastic, really stimulating, a lot of great information shared. So thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to note for everybody, we will be following up with recording from this webinar and slides as well, and also give you the heads up that in June we have another very exciting webinar set with Julie Wang, who'll be in conversation with members from our team, with Maria Espino, who'll be facilitating a discussion around Julie's book called On Their Own. Then it should be very interesting discussion furthering many of the topics that we've touched on today. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and take care. We'll see you again, hopefully in a couple of months. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.